Hello again, everyone. You're listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Brian Curran of Master Control. We're going to be having a conversation about some of the industry challenges our biopharmaceutical executives are facing. Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Well, why don't we start off with, I know we're at this event and people are coming up and asking all kinds of issues and challenges and your input on what is going on in a very dynamic space. What are some of the things they're coming to you with?
Great. Thanks for asking about that, because it's interesting to me. I see the same thing at this conference that I see generally across the industry, and that is you guys have done a wonderful job getting some very recognizable speakers to talk about the future of the industry and how automated it is and how all the batch records are electronic, et cetera. But what we see is a gap in the industry because 80% or more of the companies are actually using paper for their batch record process. So in the manufacturing process, operators are filling out data captures on paper. So we see this big gap compared to where everybody thinks they should be and what they are doing, but most of the industry still hasn't adopted digital technology. They're still using paper.
And I have a lot of conversations about, talent retention, talent attraction. I think the people who do go all the way through their careers to get into these biopharma companies, they didn't do it to fill out a clipboard, hand input that into Excel spreadsheets, stare at the numbers to come up with their own solutions. There is a gap, as you say.
Yep, and in talent retention and attraction, if you're trying to attract an operator and tell them that they have to fill out paper. Personally, I hate writing birthday cards, but my wife does a good job of getting birthday cards for me to sign. But man, my hand gets sore. And so from an attraction and retention perspective, being able to leverage the technology, all of the operators already have a computer that they use in their phone or a tablet. So we've found from customers that it is definitely a retention approach. And it's more than just the technology for them. It's just a way of doing business. The other thing we like to talk about is our customers hire people to do production. They don't hire them to do the extraneous things like filling out paper. So if we can automate it, then it removes the people from having to do the things that they weren't really hired for.
And I like to say, technology doesn't eliminate people, it eliminates tasks. So once you've taken tasks off people's plate, they're free to do more, which helps you keep your head count where it's supposed to be, and you're getting more productive work out of those people.
Correct. And so there is sometimes a misunderstanding by automating, you're going to get rid of people. The way I like it to be phrased is we're removing or eliminating non-value-added time. It's up to the company what they do to take advantage of that non-value-added time. I'd like to think instead of having people review line by line, page by page, they could actually think about what are the harder problems, what are the more critical errors that they're overlooking, instead of saying, well, did they use the right color ink and did they cross out it twice instead of once?
So I can appreciate Master Control has been talking in this space for a long while. You're clearly someone the industry goes to for input. When you're saying, well, aspirationally you want to be here, and in reality you're about here, how are you helping them close that gap?
Oh, great question. So I think another metaphor I like to use is most of the traditional vendors that are creating an MES today have created it for the largest of the large companies for the bread and butter, highest margin lines. And so it's akin to, we need skyscrapers, but that's not the only buildings we need. Think about the number or percentage of skyscrapers versus all the other buildings that exist in the world. And there's certain level of skills. If you're going to build a skyscraper, you need different skills, different tools, et cetera. And up to this point in time, most of our customers haven't had access. The existing tools are too expensive, take too long to develop. So we've introduced a tool that is more like an app, more like a SaaS-based software, much lower cost. Instead of taking 1 to 2 years to implement, it's implemented in 120 days.
I mean, you've answered my next question, which was what does timelines look like? Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how this is going to change people's day-to-day, but again, I like to put myself in the position I am a technical operations person, and I can acknowledge my team is still on paper and I want them off paper. I say, hey, Master Control, help me out here. What does day one look like? What does getting started look like? How does my team's day-to-day change over time?
Seeing is believing. That's my phrase I use for the sales process, because when we tell people about this, they don't believe it. After my presentation today, a couple of people came up and was like, how do you do that? We can't even get changes done in 24 hours. How do you build a whole batch record in 24 hours? So during the sales process, we try to convince and generate awareness and change minds. So we will ask for a customer for a batch record, and we will demo to that person their batch record running in our software. Using today's technology, that's just not possible. It has to be programmed. And so with our technology, it's configurable, drag and drop, and it can be done that quickly. So seeing is believing. When our consultant goes on site with the customer, they usually go on site, I told you 120 days. 120 days is mostly change management, project management, getting some validation. The actual creation of the batch record, one consultant goes on site for 3 to 4 days and is usually done with the batch record on Tuesday.
Wow.
And then they talk about more batch records. So the day-to-day change is, there is still a lot of change management. The people that are there at a company still use paper, and so you've got to figure out how do you get the users to adopt it. We found it to be easier than expected because everybody is using an app. So one of the examples I use is more people know where the status of their pizza is from the Domino's app than you know about your production of your critical drug or your biologic that you're producing, because it's paper-based today.
As we've been talking about this, I am thinking of some of the other conversations I've had with senior leaders in industry. We talk a lot about tools. We talk a lot about technology. I am a little surprised we're talking about batch records not already being, because when they come to me, they're talking about the aspirational stuff. You're talking about where they are, and
Yes.
Now we're closing the gap. Why isn't this already an existing situation?
Great question, surprising to me as well, and I think it's just human nature that we overlook it. Because if I go to a shop floor, I see all the equipment out there, and there's a ton of technology and a ton of automation that already exists on every shop floor I've gone to. But for whatever reason, we overlook the little piece of paper that is the batch record that goes along the process. So the backdrop, similar to this environment, we have all this technology and all these cameras, but maybe somewhere in this room is a piece of paper where you're logging individuals. I don't know if there really is, but that's what exists on the life sciences manufacturing floor. 70–80% of life science manufacturers are still using paper because it has been prohibitively costly from a time perspective and money perspective. So the one thing that I'm hoping to work with others in reshaping or just recognizing, there is paper out there on the shop floor, and it is a critical piece. It is the recipe that customers use to manufacture their drugs. And it is actually just silly things. At the end of the process, was that a 6 or an 8? If you're doing it in my handwriting, it might be a 0. Who knows what it's going to be? But using the simple power of a computer, you know exactly what the digit is. If you're using paper, what data? So if you ever seen, do you recall the movie Moneyball?
Yes, of course.
Moneyball is all about learning about the data and getting the best lineup. There is no data when the companies are using paper. All of that data is locked up in a banker's box, in a filing cabinet. So I'd like to think of us as being one of many that could help the life sciences manufacturing be a Moneyball. Our solution could be like a Moneyball. Simple things like operators. Well, which operator is doing the best? The one on shift, first shift or second shift? Which group of operators? Where do I get the fewest number of errors? How do I get the most yield? All of that data is hidden, so it's based on conjecture. And just like in Moneyball, it's like, well, somebody over here knows and thinks they know what the best variation is in terms of the type of people, the type of operators, the type of equipment, everything that goes into producing drugs.
And I have to think there's also the compliance element where, you're supposed to be documenting this for regulators and to be replicatable and to be auditable. And as you say, handwriting isn't as reliable as it all being a digital piece of information that, gets pooled into one place that you can pull for whatever reason you need.
Yes. Great point, compliance. So as an industry, we know that, if you're manufacturing Tylenol, there's so much Tylenol needed that you're going to manufacture nonstop. But if you're manufacturing knees or a more orphan drug, you don't manufacture. The lines have to switch multiple times. They produce multiple products in a given week, sometimes in a given day. And so in those situations, how do you make that switch? It's really hard because there's life science manufacturing is so human-centric. What do you get when you have humans doing something? You get human errors, and you can't get away from that. As an industry, how do we solve the human errors problem? We throw more humans at it. So one of the inefficiencies is you have people entering things like a calculation. Let's say if I was doing a calculation on paper, I have to do it. I may have to rifle through other paper-based, other pages in the batch record. And then because it's human error prone, you as a verifier would do it again. And then when it was reviewed next week, somebody in that role would not trust either one of us. It would be done a third time. So when we think about the delays associated and the costs associated with drugs, well, no wonder they cost so much. We have these inefficiencies generated because it's paper-based. Simple things like doing a calculation.
Throwing more humans at human error isn't going to help. How can we be leveraging our technology better?
Love that question. And I love applying what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I happen to have an old Jeep. It doesn't have all the new technology. But my newer car has this cool technology. If I'm backing up, it beeps at me before I hit something. It's all about preventing. I also have it if I start going to the left and outside of my lane, then it beeps at me and I know to get back in. Why can't we apply that same kind of principle in our life science manufacturing environment? Currently using paper-based system, you go through the process and then somebody at the end checks and discovers something went wrong. Using computer technology, we should be able to prevent that. As an example, we've integrated or connected our manufacturing system with the quality system that tracks training. So currently, customers are required to make sure that each operator has the proper training. But we don't find out about it until after the product is done. Using our software, we actually detect that at the moment. So if you are an operator needing to perform a work instruction XYZ, the system automatically checks your training records. And if your training records are not updated, then you can not perform that task until you take that training. Or some other kind of supervisor override because we're going to get somebody that does have the proper training. So to me, I like looking at today's technology, like cars and the preventive things that the cars do, and trying to apply it to our mission-critical drug manufacturing.
I am so impressed with some of the examples that you're using here. I know we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. If there were one or two things that you want to highlight for people and really have them think about based on our conversation, what would those be?
First, there are solutions available. As humans, we don't want to go home at night kicking ourselves, but the reality is you're using paper. Paper has inherent problems. There's people involved, so there's human errors. I would just have you look for solutions that are available, because what you will likely hear from your executives is, no, I don't want to do an electronic batch record, because they have PTSD. They went through a project 10 years ago. It was a failure. Too expensive, too costly in time, etc. Today it's a new day. There's new technology available, and if I had a magic wand, I wish I could tell everybody that it was available, because it really, to me, it's irresponsible as a software vendor participating in the process of producing drugs. It's irresponsible for us to be using paper, and that should be by far the exception, not the rule. And right now it's still 70 to 80% of the time.
So for the 70 to 80% of our audience who have been listening to this and saying, I do have paper on my plant floor, if they've got questions, if they want to learn more, what is the best way to get in touch?
Please check out mastercontrol.com. You can also do a Google search for manufacturing excellence. That's the name or the product family. But either way, either one of those will get you in touch with our team, and we can share more details so that you can help yourself, help the company, and help society get out of this situation where we're relying on you to deliver a high-quality product at a low cost and still using paper, and those two are incongruent.
Brian, I really feel like I could talk to you about this all day. I find sometimes people might perceive these as very complicated things, and you have a way of explaining them in a way that's very clear. I encourage everybody to visit that website. I think this is a great solution to a real problem. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint Podcast. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.